Well, Jolene, it's very nice to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Very good to meet you again, or see you again.
Yes. So like I said before we started, I was prepping and going through your website, and I had to turn it off, otherwise I'd be reading about you all night. But so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you are a networking and entrepreneurship coach, and but your original training is as a registered veterinary technologist. Is that
correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you always know that you wanted to do both, or did you kind of start off in one area and then move around?
Well, my first documented word in my baby book was kitty.
Okay.
So it was not shocking that I would do something with cats in particular. And so I actually wanted to be a dentist or a veterinary technologist. Those were the two options that I was looking into. And I decided to go the veterinary route. But the cool thing about that is I also got extra training and became the head veterinary dentist at the clinic, which happened to be a cat hospital, which was the only one to ever have existed in Saskatchewan. And I had the honor of helping build that and manage that. So it was one of my first dream careers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so you said was the only one. It's not around anymore?
No, she sold it back in 2008 and moved to the Caribbean.
Okay.
And that was the time I tried out a few different careers before deciding to go back to business school 11 years ago, which was an entrepreneurial business school to start my company. So I got to experience a lot of different industries in my past 25 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what business school did you end up at?
Praxis School of Entrepreneurship, and it is Saskatchewan based, and it's really cool. It's entrepreneurs teaching entrepreneurs. It's a 10-month business incubator, basically, where they teach you everything you need to know about running a business. The bookkeeping side, the labor standards side. I'm a teacher there as well. So once I graduated, I asked if I could also teach some of the courses. So I teach networking, etiquette, sales, and effective listening are the three that I have taken on. Yeah.
Is effective listening the hardest one to teach, you think?
For adults, we're never really taught how in grade school or high school or even college. And I think it's one of the most important parts of excellent customer service. And so I think it's good to take a deeper dive into empathetic listening. So really, giving that other person grace and giving them the gift of your presence and not arguing.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for adults to effectively listen.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. I've been listening to a lot of psychology lectures lately, and the professor that I'm listening to is a big fan of. He's a big fan of a lot of psychologists, but he talks about Rogers quite a bit too. And I think he said that Carl Rogers came up with an experiment, and he basically said that if you think you're active listening, you're not. He said a good game to play is the next time you're with somebody or with your friends is have them. Stop me if you've heard this before. But
no, go ahead.
Is that next time you're having a discussion with a group of friends or a single friend or anybody, make sure that you can restate their point back to them before you speak, but you have to restate it to your satisfaction and theirs. And their satisfaction is the kicker, right? So of course you're going to say, I think what you're saying is this is what I'm hearing. You go through all the normal stuff, and they're going to say, no, that's not at all what I was saying.
Yeah, the paraphrasing, that's actually one of the activities that we do in the course that I teach. I think it's really important. So that, Praxis was really my deep dive into how to run a business, because you can work in many different industries, but entrepreneurship is an entirely different world. Yeah. So I'm really grateful to have had entrepreneurs teaching me, entrepreneurs specifically that have had experience.
Yeah. And so you go into this business school, and you go in with the idea of starting your business.
Yeah.
And then, is that the one that you're currently in? Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about that? So I think I said we established that you're a coach, and
I do a lot of different things. The main thing that I do, my favorite thing, is I'm a professional speaker across North America, and I've got a Texas speaking gig coming up this summer, which I'm so excited. So I keynote conferences is a big piece of my business. But the other side of it is I do corporate team building, where I utilize Myers-Briggs personality reports, stress management, leadership, change management. We dive into a whole bunch of different areas, and those are often full-day workshops for corporations across Canada. And then I also do vision board goal setting workshops. I also do career counseling, and I'm still a registered veterinary technologist, so I design courses for vet tech students across the provinces as well. Yeah, so it's a really cool, I get to work with different industries every single day, but the majority is speaking at conferences or corporate team building.
Is that just the way it went naturally, or is that what you prefer? doing the most.
It's what I prefer.
Yeah.
And I had to, it's been 11 years now of doing this, but I remember when I first started out, I offered professional organizing as one of my services because I'm my personality type, ENFJ and Myers-Briggs, but I'm very, very organized and meticulous and color-coded. And I thought, I could do this for other people because I'm really good at it. And about 2 months in, when my clients didn't follow any of my rules and I went back to chaos, I remember thinking, nope. I like to do this for myself, but not other people. And so I quickly deleted that service completely.
Yeah.
So it's been an ebb and flow throughout the years, but I've deleted services, I've added things, or if I get really excited about something, like recently I'm actually in the process of designing a brand new keynote on emotional regulation and setting boundaries. So during the pandemic, I got certified as an emotional literacy or emotion-centered coach of navigating emotions, which really leads into stress management and boundaries. So this is my brand new keynote that I'm actually launching this week, which is so exciting. So whenever I get excited about something, I love learning, so I take courses, I get certifications, and then I create my own courses or keynotes, blending in all of my other knowledge bases. So it keeps me engaged in my own career. I never get bored because I'm always learning and growing.
Yeah, no doubt. I noticed that. I was I was talking to my girlfriend last night as I was looking at all of your work, and I said, I don't know how somebody has the time to get all of these certifications and awards, and because you're on your website, there's a long bullet list, and so that's just this, as you're coming across things that you're interested in, you're just taking them on. And,
or a client, right? For example, I was doing a stress management course for a client. This was years ago. And they said, can you do change management as well? And I was like, well, give me a moment. Let me look into this. And it turned out there was a course being offered in Edmonton 2 days later. So I drove to Edmonton, took the full course, and then integrated in change management, also using Myers-Briggs. So it was the same company, Psychometrics. So sometimes it's a client ask. Sometimes it's just something I'm really fascinated about. But ongoing learning, I think, is one of my favorite things in life. And I get to create my own company so I can do whatever I want, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's probably pretty incredible to have that freedom.
Yeah, there's no limit on the budget of professional development for me because that's what lights me up.
That's amazing. And so do you find often that with client asks, is there ever a client ask that you're kind of like, no, I'm not going to learn that one? Or do you find you're most interested in?
Yeah, I just had a client the other day actually ask about if I could teach negotiation skills. And I said, nope. I mean, I could, but it doesn't intrigue me. It doesn't light me up. So I did say no. And I think with the boundaries course that I'm designing, it's really important to know what lights you up and what doesn't. And the book I just gave you, the chapter that I wrote, is all about figuring out your personal and professional purpose. And if it's not aligned, it's much easier to say no.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense too. Yeah, it's interesting that they asked you to teach about negotiating. You said no too, because in those psychology lectures that I've been listening to, the professor talks about that as well. He says that you can't negotiate if you don't say no.
Exactly.
And obviously, but you need to learn how to be able to tell people you're not going to do something, right? Yeah.
Well, in my favorite, the keynote, the title of the one I'm developing, and I'm doing the video this week with Sick Picks Productions. We already have the session booked.
That's awesome.
It's called No Thank You Forever. And that's the title of it. And it's, of course, setting boundaries, emotional regulation. But I think it's really important when it's something that you know you do not want to do, that you are very clear and concise in saying no and not leaving anything extra. For example, if you say no because, and you start to over-explain yourself, people will often find holes in that, or they'll say, okay, do it a different date. But if you say no, period, like no, they'll go find someone else.
Yeah.
And I think not feeling guilty about that is really important.
Yeah, totally. I was helping somebody write an email to one of their teachers the other day, and they were doing that a little bit. They started explaining or trying to be like, okay, like, well, why do I say that I'm doing this? I'm like, don't just. Yeah. This is a professional discussion. They don't if they need the reason and they decide that it's appropriate that they ask you, they will. Just tell them no. Like
exactly.
So you don't need to explain yourself all the time.
No.
And it gets exhausting, right?
It does.
Yeah.
And then again, people find holes and they can work around that.
Yeah. It's helped me a lot to with saying no, just to be more authentic, which everybody appreciates, of course. But I find that if I'm thinking about saying yes to something, but that it's not going to be congruent with maybe something I disagree with morally or ethically, or just something I don't want to do,
Yeah.
then I'll just say no, because I know if I say yes, I'm going to resent the person I'm saying yes to because I'm doing something I don't want to, and then I'm going to just be frustrated the whole time. So they're not going to want to have me around for whatever it is.
And to your point, those two emotions, right? Frustration, resent. You don't want to go into anything with those.
Yeah.
And if you know the emotions you want to experience, going back to my emotional regulation background, then it's easier to decipher what's going to fit and what's not going to fit. So, for example, if gratitude or joy or wonder, whatever your emotions are that are going to be the theme for your life, does it fit? If not, it's an easy no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, when I was reading your website, it said that, coming back to Myers-Briggs a few times, it said that, you said that it kind of stemmed from an interest in Jungian psychology.
Jung, yeah, Carl Jung, he's incredible. And the cool thing about Myers-Briggs is it's the top tool used in the world. 88% of Fortune 100 companies still use it to this day to be the most successful. And that's one of the reasons I went in. But the other side that a lot of people don't know is the reason it's called Myers-Briggs is Catherine and Isabel, that's their last names combined, is they designed the questionnaire based on Jungian research.
Oh, okay.
And it was for people to truly figure out their natural strengths so that they could find careers that were aligned. So that's really where Myers-Briggs started, is on the career development side of things. And now it's expanded out into every possible area, including leadership and networking. I use it for networking skills too. But I think it's just really cool. Why wouldn't you want to use the tool that most of the most successful companies in the world are using?
Yeah.
And on the personal side as well. I think it's just as important in dating, in marriage, and family dynamics to know the personality types of the people you interact with.
Yeah, definitely. Well, even just of yourself, right? Like you're saying, like, because I think we understand ourselves a lot less than we think we do. So
agreed.
Yeah. Are you asked to speak on the Myers-Briggs often then, or is it mostly just help using as a course tool?
So it's definitely a course tool. And it's not going to be included in my emotional regulation and boundaries course, but my networking etiquette keynote, as well as my course, is very heavily based on personality type. Because if you can tell based on body language or word choices if someone's an introvert or an extrovert, how they gain energy, do they like details or big picture? Are they more value-based or logic-based? Are they super spontaneous by nature, or do they really like to make a plan? And you don't need to be an expert, but as soon as you know the tips and tricks, you can easily navigate and use the platinum rule, which is my favorite, which is to treat people the way they want. Which a lot of people are a little too self-focused, and they maybe use the golden rule, which I know it seems like a good rule, but most people don't want to be treated the way that you do. And so you have to really step out of the golden rule into the platinum rule, which is going to get you out of your comfort zone and require you some behavioral adaptation. But I think it's really important to kind of be a chameleon when it comes to customer service, because it's all about respect and speaking the language that they would want you to speak. And if that's body language, if that's word choices, I think it's shows a high level of self-awareness if you're willing to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. I've never heard that before. That's amazing. Do you, is that lots of people's reactions when you talk about the platinum rule, if they haven't heard it before?
They're like, what? We just know about the golden rule. And I know the golden rule sounds good. It really does. But people aren't like you. They have different personalities, religions, cultures, and value sets. So if you treat someone the way you would want, it's going to work about 2.9% of the time. So I don't highly recommend that one.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. It's funny when you hear things like that and you're like, well, now that I know that, it seems obvious.
Right?
But yeah. Yeah, and so that's going to be pretty difficult to teach, with trying to get people to, after hearing the golden rule their whole lives. For most people, it's probably, I would imagine, it's difficult to teach them to kind of set themselves aside and decide to speak to somebody the way that person wants to be heard.
Yeah, it takes practice, absolutely. But what I love about personality profiling is I don't just take it to the highest level. Like, are you extrovert or introvert? Because that does matter for sure about how you gain energy. But what's more important is the behavior side, because behaviors change consistently and you can force behavioral change. So you can be a full-on extrovert, for example, but perhaps you need to practice some introverted behaviors when you work with someone your opposite type. And for introverts who want to be public speakers or they really want to get good at being outgoing, they're not becoming extroverts, but they're practicing some extroverted behaviors. And I think if you can break it down to what behavior do I need to work on or do less of to get the goal that I'm looking towards, it makes it a lot easier to navigate. Because you're not changing your personality, but you can always change your behaviors. That's one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah, that's amazing. And well, it makes it more practical too for a lot of people instead of trying to just make it completely theoretical the whole time, right? And you're actually working on something. Yeah,
you've got something tangible to work with. And with the report, and I know I go above and beyond, but I love to learn, but I pay to have my report done every single year. And then I track my behavioral movements based on the behaviors I'm choosing to work on to see if I'm shifting. And that's often how I get most of my goals is behavior based. What do I need to change or start doing or stop doing or continue doing perhaps to get the goal that I want? And that's where I designed my vision board goal setting workshops as well. It does matter what your personality is with how you set goals and what excites you. You know, certain people love details. I don't. I'm the exact opposite. I like the vision, the analogies, metaphors, the big picture. Details stress me out. They exhaust me. Whereas somebody who my opposite might want to do SMART goals and know exactly how they're going to get every goal. That is not how I set goals. And I'm more visual. So again, vision boarding works very well. So it's really neat when you really start to break it down to figure out what lights me up, but more importantly, what lights other people up.
Yeah, no doubt. Have you read Atomic Habits?
Yes.
I figured, probably.
Phenomenal book.
There's another question that popped into my mind as you were speaking. Oh, as you get these examinations done or these tests done yearly, do you find that you're surprised by the changes, or they're kind of about what you expected?
I'm always ENFJ. That'll never change. I'll always be an extrovert, but I find as I get older, I'm becoming a lot more introverted in a lot of my tendencies, which is normal due to maturity and type development. But it's the one area that I was so proud of in entrepreneurship is I am extremely systematical, methodical, planful, early starting, like top of the class 20 years ago, the color coordinated pens. I was that student, but it was exhausting. I was very much a perfectionist. And when I got into entrepreneurship, it's chaos. You don't know when your next paycheck's going to be. You're making up things that don't exist yet, and it's a lot to navigate. And so I realized very quickly my natural personality preference was actually going to get in the way of succeeding in entrepreneurship. And so I actually practiced all the opposite behaviors for years, which would be being emergent, being spontaneous, being more casual, you know, letting things go to the last minute and really forcing procrastination just to see if I could. And now I'm actually balanced on both sides with my behaviors, which in a workshop setting is beautiful because I could in my mind know what I want to do, but I'm also extremely adaptable in the moment to what the room needs. And I can read body language, and I'm really good with reading energy in that regard. I'm very intuitive in the Myers-Briggs. So it actually serves me very well now to be, blended on both sides with my behaviors. But that took years. And Atomic Habits, right, James Clear, really goes into it. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can actually reprogram your brain and create new connections. And I think you just have to be willing to put in the work.
Yeah, that's the key, right? It takes time. You got to work at it. And having that versatility, I would imagine, is unbelievably useful.
Oh, yeah.
Was it frustrating though because the way you described it as you're saying it, the picture that comes to mind is you're saying that it's like you have to take your personality as you understand it and have it codified and literally try to represent the inverse of that.
Yes.
To get those abilities.
It's exhausting at first, but like I said, as soon as you start to develop those connections, it gets a lot easier. It becomes a habit. It doesn't mean it's going to bring you as much energy, though. And I think that's where, just because you get good at the other side, you still want to go back to your natural to balance back out. And the stress management side is fascinating. So your personality, when you get acutely or chronically stressed, you actually flip to the opposite side. Okay. And if you haven't practiced behaviors on those sides, it's often, they call it like Jekyll and Hyde or the shadow self. It's a different version of yourself, and it can be childlike and inappropriate. But if you practice behaviors on both sides, you actually temper your future stress response. So from a neuroscience perspective, the stress management side is quite fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating too. I remember reading a little bit about that in university, and when I was we're looking into positive psych a little bit more, and I might be out to lunch with this, but I believe I remember reading in my textbooks that it was talking about the fact that if you can kind of practice these techniques to deal with stress and to cultivate positive emotion, that you can kind of build up a defense against negative emotions. So it's not only that you have these tools and that now you know how to use them, but it's becoming more automatic in your mind. You become more resilient even when you don't need to use a specific technique.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And then emotions, going back to that as well, which links right into stress management, is what emotions come to the surface. And it's important to know how to navigate those and how to perhaps switch to more serving emotions. There's no good or bad emotions. They all give you energy, they give you purpose, they give you an impulse. But how long you sit with those emotions and before you decide to move on to a better frequency, perhaps. For instance, anger is perceived injustice. If you think of anger that way, you look at it differently. It's how women got the vote. It's not a bad emotion, right? Something is unjust. You will feel angry. But frustration is you want things to go faster. Shame is I have done something that my community would frown upon, for example. So if you can navigate the different descriptions of emotions, you can better handle stress. Whereas most adults use about 6 emotions. They can only name 6 to 15, which is pretty scary when you think there's hundreds of emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as if you're so simple that you're only 6 emotions, right?
Yeah.
You're so dynamic. That's interesting.
And you might experience 50, but if you can only name 6, the cognitive center, the frontal cortex, can't kick in and be logical. And so that's something that is really, really fascinating as well.
Yeah. You used the word to describe the emotions. I lost it, but it was, as you were talking about them, I wish I remembered. I hadn't heard it before, but it was interesting. The being able to name more than 6 emotions too is, I bet, just helps people not only in understanding the emotion, but just knowing that there exists another one, I would think.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah. And different languages have different emotions that we don't have, which is really cool. Like even one of my clients in my course brought up some emotions. He was German, and we don't have an emotion to describe that emotion. Or Finnish. There's another one. I can't remember, or sisu, I think it was called, but it was like courage in the face of, fear, but it was worded so eloquently. But yeah, so I think it's really cool to explore other languages as well, because they might have an emotion, a better emotion than we would have to describe a feeling.
Yeah.
And to really just expand our vocabulary, Time Magazine just put out an article on emotions, and it said, if you cannot differentiate emotions, you're twice as likely as an adult to retaliate with aggression.
Wow.
So teaching our children emotional navigation at a very young age is going to make them better adults. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the socializing piece and being, using them not only to understand yourself, but to interact with people is, I heard the other day, I hope this is not true, but I think it might be, but I heard that if you don't properly socialize a child by 4, it's just about impossible to afterwards. I thought that's so scary. Like you get 4 years and you gotta make sure you're on the ball.
Yeah, I heard 6 years. Well, 4 probably for that, but 6 years is where they start to develop their actual values and how they see the world. And so it is really important if you're a parent to spend some time and really dive in with values, with emotions, with an understanding of empathy, compassion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons that I'm so interested in psychology. It used to be that I was just interested in the brain and thinking and just the brain. But as time goes on, I get closer to thinking about becoming a dad. I become obsessed with that aspect of it. I'm like, how do I use this to know how to be a proper parent? So, and it's a never-ending discovery process, right?
Yeah.
But no, like the emotional regulation piece is so difficult. Do you find that as you're working with clients that they are kind of surprised by how little they know about their emotional regulation?
And I got certified out of Spain during the pandemic. Sadly, it was on Zoom.
Wow.
I wish I was in Spain.
Oh, okay.
My coach is in Spain, but we actually memorized 88 as participants. And then I went on to get the full certification where he coached my coaching and I had to test client. And she actually said, in 4 sessions, she got so much value and pieces that she never even heard of in the therapy she had done before. And she's like, it was never really spoke about of how to control your emotions, but we figured out that dignity was the emotion she wanted to experience more often, which was the self-worth piece. Yeah. And I think if you can break it down to the emotion you want to experience, it helps you with the behaviors that you want to do to achieve it. So yeah, I'm an executive coach, I'm a life coach, but really where I get my energy is on a stage. Yeah. So in the next 5 years, I want 70% of my business to be keynoting conferences on, it might be emotions or the networking. That one lights me up.
Yeah.
I actually rebranded as Canada's networking expert a few years back.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
So I want to be the first person to speak at a conference so that everyone in that room is going to be equipped with conversation starters that they feel comfortable asking, an elevator pitch. So are they engaging within the first 20 seconds? Can they assess people's personalities? What about follow-up etiquette, business card etiquette? I think we need to start doing more of that at conferences to get people to find peer mentorship, to connect with new people. Because what people tend to do is they go to conferences and they sit with people that they know. Well, you could have stayed home.
Yeah.
Right. You could have zoned in on Zoom. There's just no point. And so I think some people are nervous about it or maybe just don't have the skill set. So I like to kick off with high energy and get people really connecting. That's creating connections is my tagline.
Wow. So Canada's networking experts. Yeah. So you're looking to become the go-to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like you've got this background in veterinary technology, and then going into, you've got all these backgrounds in self-development. Like why specifically networking as opposed to like performance or something?
Oh yeah. So when I was 19, I still remember this. It wasn't the dream vet that I was working with, the one I designed the cat hospital with. She was the best boss I ever had. But I worked with other employers before that. And I remember saying to them, wouldn't it be so cool if I could get business cards? And I could go to events in the community and talk about how great our clinic is and maybe get some connections and get them to bring their pets. And I remember they shut me down and they're like, no, we don't do that in this industry. Like, no. And they're too expensive. And I look back and I still laugh because it probably would have been less than $100 to get me a box of business cards, right? Yeah. And I would have gotten business because I really saw value. And I'm an extrovert by nature. I love connecting with people. I'm curious and I'm really good at sales. And when I opened the cat hospital of Saskatoon with Dr. Stocking, I asked the same question and she said, go ahead, you're the manager, you order whatever business cards you want, you go to any events you want, I'll pay for it. And that is really where my spark came with the networking side. And I still remember when I was a vet tech and I had no plans in leaving, but I was doing a vision board back then and I put a business suit on it. And I didn't know why, but I was drawn to it. And I remember thinking, one day I'm going to be on the stage and I'm going to be wearing a suit. Wow. And I don't know where that fits, but I still have that vision board to this day. So now when I do vision board workshops, I always say, I bring hundreds of magazines and stickers and travel and you name it, we hit every area of life. But even if you don't know where it fits, still put it on or keep it. Because often it's a manifestation that might come later. So I get really excited, and I also play lots of 90s music, so those workshops are just a blast. Yeah. And I rebranded them as corporate only, and so there is a business aspect, but I think it's just as important to know the personal goals of the people you work with.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really cool. So it wasn't ever planned. It was just kind of completely organic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess the other piece of that is I was asked to do a 20-minute presentation to the vet tech students, and I was already working in practice. And I said, oh, no, thank you. And I didn't say no, thank you forever. I said, no, thank you. And the head of the program at the time, she's like, yeah, I'm not asking you. Like, I want you to do this. Yeah. And you don't say no to that lady. She was like, you said yes to her, even though I was already graduated. And I still to this day credit her for my first attempt at public speaking. And I remember I didn't do that well because it was my first time. And she mentioned that they were doing Toastmasters in the program. And she said, do you want to come back as an honorary student and take Toastmasters just for fun?
What's Toastmasters?
Public speaking course.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I did. I took that for 3 years. And I think I did 20, 30 speeches in that time. Wow. And then I got really excited about it. And now I teach presentation skills as another one of my services. But I think it's just getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of that fear and trying it. And then just mastering the craft, which might take years. But once you're excited about something, I think you'll always find a way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Once your mind is, yeah. Well, your brain is amazing because you set it on a goal and it's just going to push everything out of the way. It's like, this is what we're figuring out. Yeah.
And the other cool thing with goal setting, and I get really excited about this, is if you don't tell other people, how are you going to get it? Because the reticular activating system in your brain, it's activated when you know what you want, when you hyper focus, and then your brain starts to see things everywhere that relate to it. So if you tell other people, then they're going to start to look for you. And the example, Tony Robbins always uses this example, is if you buy a car, you see it everywhere. The same color, the same make, the same model. Well, it was always there, but now your brain is hyper-focused in. Or if you're at a coffee shop and you want to be an entrepreneur, for example, you're going to hear a conversation across the space of somebody talking about entrepreneurship because your brain is zoned in. So I always say tell as many people as you can, because that's how you get the most phenomenal goals, because they might have solutions that you don't.
Yeah.
And some people keep their goals secret, they keep them private, and that's fine. But you're kind of limiting yourself in that regard.
When it's so hard to do things in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
You're essentially utilizing more brain power when you're doing
Yeah.
that, right? And like you said, people have ideas that you can't come up with simply because you're not that person.
Yeah.
What about though, like, and this is not, I've never seen anything legitimate about this, but I've just heard people say it, that telling people about your goals too much can actually be negative because you're getting your, I can't remember what the word is called, but you're building a tolerance essentially to the dopamine that you'd be getting on the pathway towards that goal by telling people about it. So then it's not as rewarding as when you're actually moving towards it.
I think there's action steps, right? If you're not doing any action steps or having ambition towards it, nothing's going to happen. But in my opinion, in my experience, I should say, telling other people helps me move forward, because it's almost like you're creating accountability partners.
Yeah.
Like once I tell you, you're going to ask me about it. So I better actually do something about it. Another simple example is I was in Vancouver once at a conference speaking, and I always network the trade show. Like I love networking. So I did that. And there was a lady, and I had known her briefly, and she asked me a random question. She said, "What's your goal in the next half year? Like, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I really want to speak in all of these provinces by July." And that was a pretty big goal. And you can't even make this up. She looked at me and said, "Would you do 3 airplane rides and 2 really long car drives in 5 days? 5 cities." Yep. So we did it. And by July, I got my goal.
That's cool.
So if I hadn't said that, she never would have done any of the things that led to that actually happening. So I think it is really important to be clear and concise on what you want, not too vague. But I think you should tell people.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Especially because, well, it's like the same thing as, when we were talking about saying no. You say no, then the person knows that this means no. They're not bullshitting or beating around the bush. They're just saying no. Or if you are specific about a goal, then people know like they've actually got this planned out a little bit. So my help actually might be lucrative for them.
My favorite example is George Canyon's one of my favorite country music stars, and he's Canadian. And I've met him many times. But what I really wanted was him to sing Jolene by Dolly Parton to me.
Yeah.
And I remember people were saying, like, that's not going to happen. I'm like, sure it is. Yeah, that's what I want. It's on my vision board. Just like when I met Tony Robbins, that was on my vision board, and that happened. And it did happen with George, and that was in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
Wow.
And it was when he was signing CDs afterwards. And I said my name, and he started singing it, and Doc Walker and Charlie Major were there. Like, it's just... It is so cool when you start the law of attraction or solution mindset orientation, regardless of, depending on your personality type, one of those 2 phrases is going to be more attractive to you. But it's all about hyper focus in the brain, and there is neuroscience behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the law of attraction piece is really, really interesting too. Cause I remember having, I never made a vision board, but I remember having, that's not true. I have made a vision board. But a few years ago, there was a bunch of changes I wanted to make in my life, and I remember just like starting them. And I didn't have a plan, but I just like set out to like do things I wanted to do more. I would just like when I got the option to, I would go out and talk to somebody, for example, at university. I was finishing my last year, I thought, and I was like, I haven't made any new friends. Like I've got the same friends that I started school with, and I'm pretty introverted, so I thought like, I'm gonna go sit down at a new table when I start class.
Nice.
So I started doing stuff like that and developed my just ability to go out of my comfort zone and talk to people. But the biggest thing over the last like 4 or 5 years for me was just learning that you can it sounds funny to say now, but you can actually learn new things. You can add things to your abilities, and as you're doing them, your goals become more and more realistic. The unrealistic goals 5 years ago get more realistic as you're getting towards them, because you've accumulated this repertoire of experience where you're like, no, if I set out to do something, I can do it. Yeah. Whereas I think, unfortunately, lots of people in the world today have these big wants and goals and dreams, but they it's not that they necessarily don't have the skills or don't know how or are afraid. It's that it actually seems impossible.
Yeah.
They're looking at something and they're like, no, there's no way I'm ever going to speak to that person because I don't exist in
So
a
you shut it
realm
down
that-
as a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you start doing things, you learn that, no, I can actually make
Why
it
not
happen.
me? I always
Yeah.
think, why not me?
Yeah.
Texas, I put that on a vision board just 6 months ago. And I love country music. I'm from a farm. Like, I had cows growing up. Of course I want to go to Texas. And I don't want to go everywhere in the States, just Texas and California. So I'm very specific where I want to speak. But I put it on my vision board. And then I recently spoke in Toronto. And there was a lady from Tennessee. And I mentioned, I'd really like to speak in Texas. And she's like, noted. And about a month later, she sent me a call for speakers for the veterinary conference that's in Texas. And she goes, well, you should apply. This is what you want. Well, I wouldn't have got that. I'm not on the email list. If I hadn't said that, I never would have found out. And I just found out last month that I'm accepted. And so that was within a 6-month time frame that I got exactly what I wanted. But if I didn't tell someone, again, you can get goals by yourself for sure. But if you expand your spheres, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like you were talking about with when you're networking, you don't know what ideas somebody else is going to come up with. But you also like opportunities don't just manifest themselves out of thin air.
Yes.
Opportunities come from every single thing that you do is coming from somebody else.
Yeah.
You have to talk to them to get those ideas from them, right?
Yes.
It seems weird to say that as something that's a joke, but like we said before, like people don't always know these things. It's just not intuitive, right?
Yeah, and to your point, with you saying, I'm just sitting at a new table today, I'm going to make a new friend. You didn't become an extrovert. You just practiced some behaviors that are typical in extroverts. And I think if we break it down to what behavior do I need to work on or stop doing, for example, it'll change everything. Because behaviors are easy. Your personality is never going to change. Jungian psychology states that you are wired that way. It's how you get your energy. But your behaviors change consistently.
Yeah.
Which I really like, never to use personality type as a crutch. Use it definitely in terms of what are your strengths, what careers are more attractive to me. It's beautiful in that angle. But when it comes to getting goals that you want, be willing to adapt to the opposite side every time you need to.
Yeah. I would imagine that hearing that it probably helps people a lot too, because one of the things that is so scary about going into a new situation or new environment is that sometimes you can feel like you are going to have to dissolve your personality to move on into something new. But it sounds like what you're saying is that that's not necessarily true. It's that your personality is this base that you're always going to come back to, but you can emulate the behaviors of different personalities in order to use those in new situations.
Like the cool thing, I'm ENFJ, so extrovert, intuitive, big picture thinker. I'm a feeler, more value based, and a J, which is that systematical, planful.
Right.
So ENFJ, I'm 2.9% of Canadians. I'm very rare. But when I did all of the career reports on myself, when I was trying to figure out what company I'd want to start as an entrepreneur, veterinary, dentistry, teaching, career counseling, and speaking were the top 5 careers in the world for my type, and I've done all of them.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, there's nothing to that personality stuff, well, there is. And out of all 16 personality types, most engineers, over 80% of them, are 2 of the 16 types. So knowing that from a customer service aspect, I can walk into a group of engineers, which are very opposite to myself, and I use different word choices. I set up the activities quite differently because I know what they would prefer. And so I'm still being authentic, but I'm being respectful to their personality preferences.
Yeah.
So I think the word respect really needs to come in when you're adapting. You're not changing yourself. You're not being inauthentic. You're being respectful.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's the platinum rule, right? That you're talking. Yeah.
100%.
You said that your personality will never change. Do you think that it can, or it ever should, or is that?
It only under trauma have I ever seen a letter switch sides. But again, that's not real. That is a trauma response. And often once that person works through what they need to work through, they will flip back to their natural. So Carl Jung truly believes, and this is again Jungian based, that your personality, you're wired a certain way at birth even. Like even babies, they can actually tell in the womb if they're extroverted or introverted based on how much they move. They've followed children throughout their lifetime, done a lot of surveys, a lot of studies, and that's your gift. You'd never want to change it. It doesn't change. But again, the behaviors is a different area completely.
Okay. And so, and I guess this would be the trauma aspect of it, but like if somebody was, I don't know, I guess, I don't even know how you describe their personality, but was, had an addiction and was going through all this stuff and then came out on the other side and you hear these great stories of people going from living on the street and being addicted to being pillars of their community. Would you say that the personality type it's been the same then that whole time, and it's just the trauma is making them act in different ways, and it's not that their personality actually has been changing through that process?
And I always say, to get back to balance when you're feeling really stressed, go back to your natural. It'll always bring you energy. If you're spontaneous by nature, go for a drive on a Sunday, see where you end up. If you're a J like me and you really like systems and you're feeling really chaotic or the world is messy, organize a drawer. And I know it sounds so simplistic, but it gives you a sense of control. Extroverts often want to talk things out because they process verbally. Introverts might need some time alone because they process without other people generally, or fewer people. So if you can go back to what brings you joy, it'll often balance you much more quickly. And that's a piece of the stress management side from Myers-Briggs.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. I imagine that's probably one of the things you're talking about a lot too, especially because in a workplace,
it doubled my business during the pandemic.
I bet. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, because you're moving, everybody's environment has changed so much, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a heavy topic, but it was a very popular topic. And I still talk a lot about resilience and stress in the workplace, but now the vision boarding, the goal setting, the networking etiquette is really coming back to life after the pandemic has calmed. And it's really joyful. I'm really excited to see this shift.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I assume that you were doing more stuff on Zoom then as well. Did you still get to do a little bit in person, or was it kind of like shut off right onto the computer for
Actually, a lot was Zoom. So I had to get certified as a virtual presenter, of course, because I like learning. So that was fine. So I could get really good at Zoom. And I did most of my workshops online, which actually was great for other provinces, right? Because they didn't have to fly me in and it was less work on everyone's part. But it's not the same. You don't have the added benefit of the body language and being in person. So my preference is always in person, but I can do it on Zoom. So that was something that did shift during the pandemic. But I did have one mining site that brought me in and I had to wear a mask and a hard hat. And we came in and we still did it in person because they're like, we miss it so much. We are so tired of Zoom. And so I'm willing to do either or, whatever works best for that company. But I don't prefer hybrids where you have 2 or 3 people online and the rest of the people are in person, because there's a huge disconnect.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
So that's I generally will not do that as a workshop facilitator.
Yeah. I lost it. I had another thought. I had another question about public speaking. At this mine, were you talking to the miners, or was it more corporate or
more corporate?
Okay.
Yeah, the leadership team. Yeah.
So, but you were in the mine. That's why you had a hard hat on.
Yeah, I had a hard hat on. I had to follow all the protocols and the procedures, and I had to have a mask on because it was the pandemic. And yeah, it was a very interesting time. Yeah,
I bet. Yeah, I've never been to a mine. And so, as you're going from Zoom and then back to in person, and going into the pandemic, not only moving from in person to Zoom, did it move away from networking? The speeches you were asked to give?
It's interesting. I once had someone say to me, choose a lane, pick one thing. And I remember thinking I would get so bored if I picked one thing. Like, I have 7 services. I work with a new industry every day. I keep adding courses, right? And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And so thank goodness I kept it the way that it was, because when the pandemic hit, all public speaking disappeared overnight. All the conferences were canceled. I was actually going to Paris to speak in a veterinary sense, and they canceled that. Yeah. I was in Banff. I was supposed to be in Banff the week after, and it canceled. So immediately my business could have disappeared, but because I was still doing corporate workshops and I had the personality reports and the career counseling took off during the pandemic, because a lot of people were tired. They just wanted something new. And so I'm really excited and happy that I didn't listen to what other people were telling me, and I kept all of my services, because my workshops went to 80% of my business in those 2 years. And now the speaking is starting to come back to the 80%. So I guess my advice to anyone starting a company is be cautious whose advice you listen to. Always thank people, but do what's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You gotta do what you want to do, first of all. Otherwise, you're not even really acting like yourself if you're doing something that somebody else is doing. But also, from a purely business standpoint, it's not a bad idea to have more than one revenue stream, right?
Yeah.
It was that was probably pretty stressful then, kind of like, and like you are versatile, so you've got all these different facets, but especially moving away from the one you're the most interested in,
I know.
you're kind of freaking out a little bit.
Oh yeah. And I shouldn't say it disappeared, the networking. I actually started hosting monthly networking sessions where people could just come practice their elevator pitch. And I didn't even charge for this. This was my give back to the community of how do we keep these connections going? And I just created monthly networking sessions where people would come in and network, and I'd create breakout rooms. So that's something I did a lot during the pandemic to really keep people connected, because loneliness became an epidemic during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So that was something, especially for introverts. They thrived the first 6 months, but after that, not so much, because they didn't have as many people they trusted to reach out to. So that was actually quite exhausting for them.
Yeah, it's just a weird one, right? Because you would think, like, intuitively it seems like, oh, they'd be thriving, but everybody's got a baseline, right?
Yeah.
You can't exist alone. What were like some of the biggest challenges you noticed going into like trying to do like networking events? These were on Zoom, I assume.
Yeah.
And so having these breakout rooms where you're pushing people into these little digital pockets. What was that like?
Well, it was, I mean, again, I got certified as a virtual presenter, so I had all the skill sets of how to be super engaging and how to get people comfortable with it. And so, but I had large groups, though, still to this day, it's hard to navigate as one person because I'm a solopreneur. Like, I do not have a team. I do everything by myself. And so when you'd have up to, say, 50 people on a call, just to navigate that alone was a lot. Whereas in person, it's so much easier. You can watch body language. You know when people need a break just by watching what direction their feet are pointed, for example. But on Zoom, you have these tiny little screens. And some people don't even show their videos, which is exhausting for the speaker if they can't see emotional reactions, they can't see people nodding. So my favorite tip for online presenting or being on a call is always show your video. It shows a high level of respect.
Yeah, I never would have thought about that, but that makes sense. Because if you're not, I feel bad with myself now because I've got my camera off very often. But if you're not, it's kind of like you got one foot out the door, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of like, I'm here, but I'm doing other stuff. That's why my camera's off.
And it's not an effective way to network.
Yeah.
People won't know you're there if your video isn't showing or if you're not contributing to the chat box. So it's actually a really cool, easy way to network when you're on a Zoom meeting or watching a speaker on Zoom or Teams, what have you, is people will network with you in the chat box or the breakout rooms, and then you can actually connect with them on LinkedIn and then go from there. So it's very effective.
Yeah. That makes sense, especially you get a couple years into it and people are craving it, right? Like more so than at the beginning when it was kind of like, oh, this is weird. And then it's like, this sucks. We want to talk to people. So yeah, this is really interesting. With the camera off too, it's, the respect piece is really interesting. I'm going to think about that next time I keep my camera off, but also, you can't multitask. So, and if your camera's off, it's like maybe you don't have one, or maybe you just don't want to show your face. But a lot of times, it's because the person is doing something else, right?
Oh, so they have 3 screens. We know this. Most adults do. And they're checking emails on this one, and you're on this screen. And so what I like to do for myself, even, because I fall to that too sometimes because I'm busy and I have stuff to do, is I'll shut down all my other screens and just focus on the speaker so that I'm not distracted. Yeah. So I think it goes both sides, right? Is you need to be there, but as the speaker, it shows a high amount of respect if people are watching you and interacting with you. And there's a lot of tips that I learned on how to engage people better online, like having polls, for example, every 20 minutes, changing your vocal tone, or having a prop, or getting someone else to speak, or doing a breakout room, because Zoom fatigue was a real thing. Yeah. And people got tired.
Yeah. I did. Yeah. With the Zoom too, it's probably helpful even just to have encourage people to keep their cameras on if you're calling on people, I'd imagine more too, because then you're kind of like, well, I can't be multitasking because if somebody asks me a question, I got to know what they asked me.
And it's okay, it can be exhausting to have your video on for hours too, and I get that. So it's okay to turn off your video when they're, say, showing a PowerPoint, but when it goes back to the main group and people are asking questions, always turn it back on at that point.
What were some of the techniques you learned, if you don't mind?
For digital, for being online?
Yeah, like for the Zoom, so like keeping engagement. You mentioned changing your tone.
Change your tone. Props are amazing. It will refocus someone, even if you're engaging.
Sorry, prompts or props? Okay.
Yeah, so for example, if I mentioned this certain book, but I held that book up, people focus right in because it's something different in the screen. and getting other people to speak. Vocal tone, you have 3 levels of your voice. I actually just hired a vocal coach. So I'm learning a lot about projecting and what tone I need for what response I'm looking for. So that's another really big piece. But you really do need to up your energy and be a little more outgoing if you're online, especially for introverts.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Would with the prop piece, is it just an attention thing, like, or is it
Humans we love to see something. Most adults remember in pictures. I think we hold 60,000 times more weight to pictures than we do text. So thinking of that alone, if I say something and then I show you what I mean, you're more likely to remember it. And from a body language standpoint, we hold 12.5 times more weight to somebody's body language than what they say. So if I'm speaking and I utilize my hand movements, 1, 2, 3, but using your fingers at the same time, it shows that I know my material so well. I'm doing it in 2 languages, body languages and verbal. So little things like that can make a big difference in how engaging you are as a speaker. And if you're monotone, people will check out.
Yeah.
So this is something you need to be cautious. Even if you're really smart, people will check out if there's no stories, if there's no excitement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, you actually fall asleep.
Yeah.
Right? I had that in university all the time. Like, get into one class, I would think, well, I'm just tired today. Fall asleep in class. Then I get to the next class and the professor's interesting, and it'd be impossible for me to fall asleep because they're engaging, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can all get better at that. And I think charisma is a skill that can be developed.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a tough one though. That's a scary one, right? You talk about like being courageous or vulnerable. Like to becoming charismatic is a weird one because people they're afraid of it.
Yeah.
Like everything else, but yeah.
Well, the cool thing about charisma, and I'm taking a 30-hour course right now on body language, and she brings up charisma a lot. And what she says, it really resonates with the thinking and feeling side of Myers-Briggs, but she says you have to be warm and competent at the exact same time. And that's Vanessa Van Edwards is the author of the book Cues, which is the body language course. And
it's called Cues?
Cues, yeah. She's
book?
Phenomenal, yeah.
Okay.
So if you can be warm, so trustworthy, and competent, so you know what you're doing at the same time, people are more likely to see you as charismatic. And I relate that directly to the thinking and feeling area of Myers-Briggs, of how you make decisions. If you can be logic-based and value-based or empathetic at the same time, it doesn't have to be 50-50, but then people are more intrigued and they'll trust you more quickly.
Is there ever a place for being cold, you think?
Cold? Like more competent?
Or like just like I don't even know if it's like, how do I ask this? If is there, because you said warm and
competent.
Warm and competent. So like I guess my question is, what would cold and competent look like?
So warm is its own side. It's more like friendly, approachable, whereas the competent would be you're an expert. You know what you're talking about.
Okay.
It could be deemed as cold occasionally. If you're too far on the competent side, people won't trust you. If you're too warm or friendly, people won't respect you. And so I really think you do need to blend those two. But for an example, if I'm working with engineers, which I do a lot, 70% competent. I don't use the word love at all in the first hour. At all. Yeah. And I use different word choices and I use different body language and different activities based on the general population of their personality preferences in that specific industry. So the fact that I do career counseling on the side, I don't do a lot of it anymore, but it really gears me up to fully customize my sessions based on common personalities in those industries. Yeah. So it's always fascinating, my career, because I'm learning something new every day.
That's amazing. That's gonna be a lot of fun, trying to like a puzzle almost, trying to figure out like, okay, how do I craft it this way or this way for this group?
And automotive repair. I've recently got heavy into that industry, and it's so much fun. And then the next day I might be working with an architectural firm. So it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me interested. Again, I wouldn't have designed it this way if it was boring, right? And I know some people do like consistency. They like stability. That is not my personality. I like variety and constant change. So that's what I created with my entrepreneurial adventure.
Yeah. Well, you see that a lot in people sometimes with, you can tell when somebody's speaking to you and they're giving the same speech they've given 1,000 times over 10 years. And,
Yeah.
you know, they're kind of over it. And it's sad sometimes because you're looking at them and you're like, I can tell that you actually are passionate about this topic, but it looks like you're exhausted about it a little bit too. Whereas, I would imagine that having so many different industries that you're speaking in, like yourself, it never gets boring.
Never.
Right?
It can't.
Yeah.
There's always something to learn.
Mm-hmm. And do you find the always something to learn piece too is that difficult trying to figure out, like, when you're going into like the automotive industry, like you said, what's your research look like trying to figure out, like, okay, how am I going to give my talk in such a way that they understand it and like relate it to their industry, right?
So I definitely look at the most common personality types in those industries, and then I gear my PowerPoint very effectively that way. But I also look at what's happening in the industry. I interview people. I sit for the entire conference, even if I'm the last speaker, so that I can learn from every other speaker. And that's actually a really cool tip if you're a speaker, is to bring pieces in of what other speakers have said. And I will actually go right in during the day and change my PowerPoint completely, or add something in based on something someone else said, or quote them from the day to draw it back to what I'm talking about. And it's a really good gift to the other speakers, because then it cements what they said again. And then it shows that I was also listening. So I learned most about industries by listening to other speakers at those events, and then networking the trade show, because all of those people are industry representatives and they know the industry better than anyone else. So I will ask lots of questions as well. So when I speak, I'll stay for the whole conference, network the whole trade show. So it's usually a 14-hour day for me by the time I'm out of there. And yeah, it's a good thing I'm an extrovert, because I gain energy doing those things.
Yeah, you're not getting too tired the whole time. No. And so would that help to asking, or referring back to other speakers' presentations? Would that, do you think, help in such a sense that if somebody's in the crowd and they watch a speaker previous to you and they think, oh, I really like that speaker, and then you come on stage and you reference them and you're like, maybe they weren't necessarily quite interested in what you were going to say, and then you reference something they were interested in, and then they're like, oh, maybe I might perk up a little bit and listen to this one too.
You always want to link things so that it makes sense. Because if you had tons of speakers with totally different topics and there wasn't any integration, it's disconnected, right? And you're going to feel that as an audience, as a participant in that conference. So I think it's good to, and I know some speakers don't do it, but I think it's a really good strategy, is to stay for the whole conference and learn more and listen.
Yeah. Well, then, and then you're learning more, right? Which, in my opinion, is the most fun thing you can do. But have you ever gone to a conference and felt kind of like, as you're listening to the other speakers speak, that you're kind of out of your weight class, and not necessarily in the ability to speak, but just your knowledge on the subject areas? Or
well, this is the cool part. So I am an expert in soft skills.
Okay.
So it really doesn't matter what the industry is. The technical side, that's their game. And they bring in speakers that are experts in those specific areas. But body language, being charismatic, doesn't matter the industry. So I obviously customize, but my piece is in itself a whole other industry, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter where I'm speaking, it's relevant. And that's how I set my company up to be that way.
That's cool too. Yeah, that gives you a lot. I can't remember the word, but
the leverage. It's
probably a lot of armor too. And then I never even thought about that.
It doesn't niche me into one little area. Networking etiquette can be any industry, especially the industries that don't prefer it, like engineering.
Yeah.
The introverted thinkers, they often don't prefer it. It lowers their energy, so they're actually very interested in getting better at it. So I actually do a lot of networking in the industries that should network more, but they don't. And so it's really fun.
That would be. And would that be the most challenging industries, engineering?
Anything more technical, anything more logic or analytical based, they tend to really like what they do, not necessarily the sales side or the interacting with people side. Veterinary is actually another one, whereas most veterinarians are very introverted and they're amazing. They want to work with animals though, not necessarily the humans. So I do a lot of customer service workshops within veterinary to really relate to the human side.
And with vet, when you're speaking to a group of people in the veterinary industry, do you find that their body language is a little bit more reserved at the beginning because they're, like you said, a lot of times most of these people are interested in the animal side.
Yeah.
And now I imagine not all of them, but some of them are being dragged out to these things, and now I got to listen to a person speak. I'd rather be dealing with animals. Do you find that it's harder to open them up a little bit? Or?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. And that's where the word choices, the stories that you give, and it doesn't matter what industry it is. One of my favorite tips is to figure out what lights you up. And the chapter I wrote, it's called What Lights You Up. Mm-hmm. And then the last sentence is do that. If you can make an expert out of the people that you work with or yourself into a specific niche or area, you will automatically enjoy your life more. So for example, if you're in a leadership role and you start to figure out what really lights up each person that you lead, what they want to be an expert in, what courses they want to take, what they want to be known for, it's a game changer. But it takes time, and it does take networking skills to really create rapport for them to open up to you.
Yeah.
So that's another piece. I do leadership training as well, charismatic leadership, and a piece of that is doing stay interviews.
Sorry, stay?
Stay interviews instead of exit interviews. And a stay interview is, hey, you're still working here. Are you actually happy? Is there anything that I can do to make it better? And am I fully utilizing all your skill sets and strengths? Is there any courses you're interested in? Are you interested in leadership? Where do you want to go from here? I think we don't do that as often as we should.
Okay. And an exit interview, what would an exit interview be?
Why did you leave? It's too late by that point, but people do those all the time. But they don't do stay interviews of why are you staying?
Yeah.
Can I make it better? We really appreciate you. What else can I do to make sure that you're happy? Mm-hmm. We need to ask those questions more often because it's way too late by the time they've already quit. And often they're not being genuine or honest at that time, right? Because they're out already.
Yeah,
they're not going to tell you the real issues.
Yeah.
Whereas if you sit with someone who's still there, they will give you information that you can use to make it a better workplace.
Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things you speak on is how to have a stay interview?
Yeah, charismatic leadership. That's another one of my keynotes.
Okay, wow.
And I developed that one because of the Great Resignation.
I've
A
never
lot
heard
of
that.
people were quitting their jobs. And so there was a huge staff shortage across industry. And so that's where leadership was the top subject. And so I took leadership courses. I have leadership reports, dove into that. So I think it's really cool also with my industry or my career is depending on what the world needs, I can take courses, I can develop that. Mm-hmm. But I'll always have the networking, communication, stress as the base.
Yeah.
But it's continually changing, which is exciting to me.
Yeah, you've got a timeless underpinning to it, and it's constantly evolving and flowering. And wow.
Timeless underpinning. Yeah, I like that. Good word choice.
Thank you. You said when you were talking about, I'm sorry, your chapter is called?
What Lights You Up?
What Lights You Up. And so when when you are speaking to a crowd, are you looking for what lights up the crowd, or are you like picking people out to ask them specifically what lights them up?
I ask everyone in every crowd to answer that. They don't have to answer it in front of the room, but I pose it multiple times throughout my presentations of what brings you joy. What is the spark for you? What do you want to do? What do you want to be an expert in? And if it's a longer workshop, like an 8-hour workshop, they will answer that question. But if I'm keynoting, obviously if there's 600 people in the room, they're not all going to answer it. But I like to pose it because as soon as you hear it, you're going to start to process that. Especially the first night after you attend a conference. The REM cycle of your sleep is when you start to reprocess everything you heard that day. And it's almost like self-therapy. You recycle emotions, you process emotions. I just took a 3-hour course on sleep. This is where I learned this. Matthew Walker is the top neuroscientist in the world on sleep.
Okay.
And he said, get a good night's sleep. It's one of the most important things you can do after you learn something really intriguing, because that's when you cement the memories, is the REM cycle of your sleep. So that's again another course that I just took randomly for fun 2 weeks ago.
And there was okay. Wow. Did you learn anything else about?
So much.
Yeah.
The frontal cortex actually shuts down during the REM sleep cycle. And that's when you're dreaming, the dream state. And that's why you have such colorful, creative dreams. And that's why you can actually process things in a different way than you would when you were awake. Another really cool tip is to not have coffee generally after 2:00.
Okay.
Because then that disrupts your REM sleep cycle.
Oh, wow. Excuse me, that far, like...
Yeah.
Even if you're going to bed at like 9 or 10, like, wow, that's a long time. I guess it makes sense. So like, so many, especially stimulants, linger in your system for so long. So
yeah,
it can be pretty disruptive. Wow. And so how did in that course, did he talk about at all how they come up with those conclusions that you're going over everything in sleep?
So much research. Yeah, it's only a 3-hour course. It's brilliant. Yeah. It's masterclass.com is where I found that course.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But you can actually Google Matthew Walker. It has 2 T's. And he has tons of free YouTube videos as well. I'm positive he did a TED Talk as well.
I think
he would be the top sleep expert in the world, in my opinion.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think my dad has a masterclass subscription, so maybe I'll
Of course he does. Of course your dad does.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna watch that one. That's that's amazing. I'm actually reading I'm reading The Interpretation of Dreams right now by Freud. Yes. And I'm not even through the first chapter. So dense. Every paragraph, you're like, oh my goodness. But he's just going over have you read it?
No, but I've read Psychological Types by Carl Jung, and that was just as deep. Every paragraph you had to like sit with it because it's a lot.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh my goodness, I don't know how they fit so much knowledge in there. But right now, the first chapter in that one, at least in the translation that I'm reading, is just his review of the literature at the time. And it's so fascinating to see what people were thinking about it back then, because it's one group of people would think this way, and then the other would think a completely different way, and then there's good evidence on both sides, and I don't know what to think. And then people like Matthew Walker coming along, and then there's all this neuroscience to back it up. That's amazing that they can actually put people's brains in a systematic environment and do experiments and find out the truth behind what people were thinking as far back as like the 19th century.
And he brings those up, those books in this course. You'll like it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna add this to my list then. That was a cool one too. It was the last part I just read in that book. They were talking about whether dreams are ethical and moral or not. So that was an interesting one.
Well, now that you know the frontal cortex is shut down, there's no logic there within your dreams. So that's where the creativeness comes to the surface. So that doesn't mean you should do everything based on your dream. No, it's just a different way of looking at the world and processing emotions. Yeah. And the way he described it, it's like self-therapy. Is you recycle, you revisit, and you replay things that happened, and it helps you come up with solutions. Is how he described that process, the REM cycle.
Wow. And so with this course, are you going to incorporate this in a more practical aspect in your work, or are you looking from a more theoretical?
I'll bring that into the stress management portion, because sleep is just as important as drinking water, as anger management, all of the stuff. So there's so many pieces to everything that I do. There's just always something to learn or a course to take. I think I've purchased 8 more courses just sitting there. One of them is positive psychology. I have 3 courses. I haven't had time because I work many, many long hours as an entrepreneur with everything that I do. But when I do get free time, I have so many courses just sitting there waiting for me.
And you're traveling a lot too. So I imagine it's probably not easy to be doing that stuff in the airport, right? So.
And I like to listen when I drive, but then you can't take notes.
Yeah.
So I find it's not as effective.
I really like listening to stuff when I drive as well, but I find like if somebody can multitask doing anything, not that you should, it's probably driving, because your brain goes on autopilot, so you're not physically multitasking, but you can listen to something and drive at the same time. But even for me, I find that I just can't do it sometimes. I'll be listening to something and like 10 minutes will go by and I'm like, I didn't listen to that at all.
Oh, do you want to hear the best app ever?
Sure.
Maybe you already have this.
No, probably not.
You can get it on your phone. It's like $100 a year. It's so inexpensive. Hundreds of books. But what they do, it's called Blinkist.
Okay.
They concise every single book into 10 minutes or less.
Wow, that's
the entire book. In other words, here's high level. Here's some quotes. Here's the premise of the entire book. Here's the main theme, and done. So if you're like, I've always wanted to read that book, but I'm not sure I want to read it, the whole thing. Once you listen to the 10-minute, you'll be like, yes, I do, or no, I don't, or you'll get what you need out of it. So it's really high level. And I get a lot of my quotes from those 10 minutes because there's some really powerful authors in there. And sometimes it's the author reading it. Sometimes they have someone else. But I get bored really quick. So if you can concise something into 10 minutes, done and done.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. It's called Blinkist?
Blinkist.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I know, like... I don't like quitting books, but sometimes you're in one. You're like, I got to move on to something else. That's amazing. Book summaries.
Yeah, so I listen to a lot of books in that regard.
Yeah.
And then if I really like it, then I might purchase the full audio book. I'm much more auditory than actually reading a book. That bores me.
Yeah.
But if I can listen to it and take notes like a student, that's when I get intrigued. So I think knowing your learning style is just as important as knowing your personality type.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's becoming pretty evident from just the content that people create now too. And like there's lots of, everything's YouTube and TikTok and so on. But even that, like, people are not always watching YouTube videos or TikTok videos. They're listening to them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Or audiobooks, like you said. And podcasts are like the biggest industry now,
Yeah.
right? But people still read, but I think a lot of people are doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And moving that way instead.
And even for my keynotes, like I said, I'm meeting with Sick Pick Productions this week. 2-minute video, 90 seconds tops, like 90 to 2 minutes. They said, don't go over 2 minutes. And when people say, hey, I want you to speak at this conference, do you have an overview? I just send the video. Because it's so much easier to get a feel for who someone is if you can hear them speak.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to a paper proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially too, because I'm sure you've noticed this in your work. Sometimes, like, some people just take longer to break out of their shells, of course. But sometimes you're speaking to people and you just get like a weird sense where you're like, I don't really feel like I'm speaking to you yet, you know? And that happens on this a lot. And I've never had anybody that I think is like just lying to me. I've never had that experience. But I've definitely noticed that sometimes I'll have a guest on and it really takes like an hour to get people to like open up sometimes. You're like, wow, that was weird. Because then all of a sudden, sometimes it's literally like you hit 60 minutes and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now we're really talking. But I can't remember where I was going with that. But yeah, some people are not as open. They got a little bit of a shell.
Well, introverts versus extroverts alone, introverts are very less likely to talk about their personal lives and what they value most unless they know and trust you. Whereas extroverts are more likely to talk to a stranger about random things because they get energy by processing verbally. And so extroverts are easier to get to know in the short term. But if you take the time with introverts, they're often more loyal as friends or customers, but it does take more time to gain their trust. And I think that's an important thing to remember is that the brain of an extrovert and introvert process information quite differently. And there's different trust levels there.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. I heard that stated in a different way in the psychology lectures that I've been mentioning that I listened to. And it was very, very eye-opening. It was one of those things, like I said earlier, that sometimes you hear something and you're like, oh, that's obvious now, but I wish I knew that beforehand. Yes. And the professor that I was listening to was talking about politics, but he was talking about the fact that the next time you are talking to somebody on the other side of the political aisle from you, it's important to realize that you are interpreting the world and politics and the way things should go based on the foundation of your personality type. So he's like, it's not always that you're arguing on the same facts that have shown themselves the same ways. Like if you've got one personality type and somebody else is another personality type, you could look at something that's happened in the world and it will actually present itself to you based on the same information in completely different ways. Yeah. So sometimes you're actually not even talking about the same thing.
Yes.
And that's really important to know, right?
Very important. Yeah. And on that note, I always think too, if you're arguing with someone, Facebook's a great example when people fight in the comments. If you're arguing with someone, even if you know in your heart that you are right, if they have personal experiences to back up their opinion, you will never win. You fight all day. And I think that's where sometimes I don't ever interject myself. I don't like comments. I don't involve because you can't win. If you personally experience something, it's true to you, right? So yeah, it's when people argue, it's tough. You got to take a step back sometimes and realize that maybe your perception is different than their intent and your life experiences are quite different.
Yeah. Especially when you talk about the having a personal experience part. Like if somebody's got an anecdote, it's not only that it's an anecdote and then it's evidence for them, but then also it's become a part of them because it's in a personal experience, right?
Especially if it's happened multiple times for that person. The example I give, which is so simple, but you can argue for or against red light cameras. But if each person has a personal experience where they say it kills more people versus it saves more people, you will never get someone to win. Right? Because it's cemented in, but this happened. Right? And this is where sometimes it's important to take a step back and realize that, that was an experience. It doesn't mean it's real. And that goes into the self-awareness piece too, where just because I see the world this way doesn't mean that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of self-reflection to get to that point.
Yeah, it is a ton, especially and you can't make somebody else self-reflect, right? Like if somebody's got a personal experience, like you said, they've got multiple, and it's becoming a part of who they are. As soon as you try to argue, even if you don't come at their personal experience, you're just trying to argue the topic, you're really inviting them to forget a piece of themselves.
Yeah.
Which nobody's willing to do voluntarily, and that's when you have to get really inquisitive instead of
Tell me more.
confrontational. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's you feel very strongly, tell me more.
Yeah.
As opposed to you're wrong. Well, that doesn't go well.
No.
It's just as good as saying calm down.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do that.
And it's not nearly as interesting too. Like it's so much more fun to find out why somebody thinks something, and that I think is more fun to have your mind changed than it is to change somebody else's mind. Because you're just
agreed.
Because then afterward, especially because you don't know what you're going to change your mind on. So if you spend like 5 years, decades trying to convince other people of something, and then maybe you've convinced 1,000 people of something, and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I don't really know if I should have been telling people that anymore. Like that's a pretty hard thing to confront. So just let your mind be changed. Just ask people questions. You don't need to be telling them stuff all the time.
Yeah. So. Change your perception.
Yeah.
That people may have different intent than you think.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, we're at 100. We're at an hour and 16 minutes now.
Perfect.
So that was was there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to cover, or
just ending with the fact that you cannot change your personality type, but you can always change your behaviors.
Wow. All right. Well, if people want to get in touch with you or look at some of your work, and where can they go?
www.jolenewatson.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.